Hello and welcome to The Download from Wise Woman and Wordsmith, where insight meets inspiration. A space for creatives, dreamers and visionaries ready to spark new ideas, ignite purpose and reimagine possibilities. Here we share downloads of wisdom, stories and strategies to help you thrive in your creative journey. I'm your host, Jill Marshall. Tune in, connect and let the magic unfold.
Show you tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to The Download, the podcast where we explore the intersections of creativity, intuition, and the strange but true rhythms of the world beneath the world. I'm your host, Jill Marshall, and today's episode is, well, even for me, it's weird. And that's saying something. You know the kinds of topics I often cover here. Storytelling as energy work, synchronicities galore, downloads, archetypes, creative initiation, even miracles, time not being as linear as we think. All the juicy stuff that skirts the edge of the rational and then jumps right off. But this episode might just be the most uncanny of the lot. Here's where we enter the story. Back in December 2024, just after the US election, I had one of those moments, one of my download moments. You could call it a knowing, a sudden drop-in of insight. Whatever it was, it stopped me in my tracks. I was in the middle of thinking, as so many of us were, about the state of the world, what it might mean to have Trump back in the picture, the collective mood which was bad, the strange blend of apathy and fear that seemed to be rising. Discussions with Putin and Zelensky then seemed to be heading in a horrible direction, along with tariffs, and the whole world seemed to be just holding its breath, waiting for the worst. And that's when it hit me. As it often does in terms of the collective unconscious, it hit me visually, a symbol if you like. I got a very clear image in my mind's eye of one of my book covers. And I interpreted that message somewhere deep in my gut as this. There was going to be a reckoning, a major one, but not political. No, it would be personal, hidden deep in the past. Something monstrous from the past would emerge, something buried, something that would be a downfall. Not at the hands of an election or the media or Stephen Colbert or the legal system, but from within the past itself. Just like the character in the book that I'd seen, The Most Beautiful Man in the World. The feeling was so strong that I noted it down in my journal, and I even considered how I'd get in touch with someone to investigate real terrible events in the deep past. Now here's a strange thing. That book was published in 2012 by Penguin, the third of my books with Penguin, but unlike any of my other books, it was a novel I didn't plan to write. At that time, I had a 4-book deal with Penguin. The first 2 more rom-com titles had already come out, each about one of a trio of friends having their second act stab at life. I'd intended to write the third about the third friend in the trio, Cat. I had a storyline, the characters were already developed, I had a title and so on. And so I met with the publishing director to discuss it before I jumped in and started writing. Now, to my surprise, he hated the title vehemently, and he didn't seem that keen on the overall direction of the book either. So as we finished our coffee and stared at the walls, I mentioned that I did have something else, but it was literally only a title, one title. And that title was The Most Beautiful Man in the World. It had dropped into my head, fully formed, just days before our meeting. And when I mentioned that to my publisher, he said, yes, that's the one. Write that. I had no plot, no character arcs, no outline. I did, however, have a deal and a deadline to meet. And what happened next was unlike any writing experience I've ever had before, and I've had a few. That book poured through me in kind of a dreamlike daze. I barely remember writing large parts of it. I wasn't particularly editing or crafting or planning. I just opened a door, letting it flow in. I started writing about a character without knowing why he was the way he was. And then accidentally caught a documentary about a certain condition, and there it was, his why. I found another trio of women, very different women, weaving their way into the story. It was complex, going back and forth across time, across relationships, across continents, and somehow it all poured out in order. When I sent in the first draft, which didn't take me very long, there was a general sense of delight. I did alter the voice of one character to make it more distinctive and slightly less complicated for the reader. But otherwise, the final book is kind of pretty much what erupted out of me over several evenings in a cafe, jabbing away at my keyboard. It was different to my first two adult novels, which are more traditionally second-act chick lit. And while I hadn't set out to do that, I thought I'd written a kind of offbeat psychological thriller, a story about a narcissistic man whose charm masks his tale of destruction, and the three women who should despise each other, but who join forces to slowly piece together the truth. But here's the kicker. It turns out even I didn't know what I'd written. Because recently, in light of that December moment and some rethinking, I realised that the character in the book had been even more evil in my story than I consciously knew. The body count was rising more than a decade after it came out. Yes, I wrote it. Yes, I plotted the story. But even I didn't realise what he had done. Not fully. Only now, years later, do I see that the signs were all there. The character arc, the buried clues, the psychological patterns, his capacity for harm. He hadn't just broken hearts and, in some cases, minds. He'd ended lives. Just like that December message said, something monstrous hidden in the past. And when I looked again, I saw even more parallels. The emotional manipulation, the denial, the media mask of glamour, the way people around him still defended him, even when the evidence was undeniable. Now, if you've listened to this podcast before, you'll know this isn't quite the first time this has happened. Back in a previous episode called Creative Prophecy, How Books and Other Downloads Can Predict the Future, I talked about how the swag stories seem to leap ahead of their time. Books I'd written that accidentally predicted things, a line here, a plot twist there, a whole vibe that suddenly became real. But this one is on another level. I've always believed writers, especially fiction writers, are pattern seers. We're tracking the undercurrents. We're attuned to the mythic, the symbolic, the collective. We hear the whisper under the noise. And sometimes, without even meaning to, we write things before they happen. Not as fortune tellers, but as frequencied storytellers, tuning into what's in the field before it breaks the surface. So was The Most Beautiful Man in the World a warning shot? Or did I just give voice to something the world wasn't ready to see? At its core, the book is about a narcissist, a charming one, a clever one who weaponizes charisma and intimacy, one who keeps everyone orbiting around him even when he's done real damage. And here's something that stuck with me ever since I published it. It resonated with many, many people, especially women. For some reason it was published in New Zealand and also in Russia, where perhaps they have a familiarity with that kind of man. And one man certainly reached out and said it struck a chord with him very deeply indeed. But then a male film producer who was interested in the story told me, oh no, he's too much. No one would ever be that brazen. But if you've ever met a real narcissist, a textbook, dangerous, covert operating narcissist, and not just someone who's a bit full of themselves and plays some mind games, but is a full-blown sufferer of narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, then you'll know that's exactly what they're like. They push the boundary, and then another, then another. They create chaos and charm in equal measure, and they never, ever think they'll be caught until they are. Just look at Bill Clinton in the Monica Lewinsky case, and I am, by the way, a huge supporter of Monica Lewinsky. Gay Hendricks in The Big Leap described Clinton's vow that he'd not had sexual relations with her was like a naughty little boy who'll keep acting out until I get caught. According to Hendricks, and I quote, "People of Clinton's personality type are compelled to keep testing the limits. They're unconsciously trying to find out if they can outsmart everyone else, and they keep escalating until they discover the situation where they can't. People like this, even presidents like Clinton and JFK, he says, can't help it. They can't help themselves." And now, as headlines are emerging, some old, some new, some sealed, and some including the fact that people who could have exposed him or not corroborate with Trump seem to have mysteriously and suddenly died. So just as the real reckoning seems to be circling, I do keep thinking, was this book his story? Now let me be clear. I'm not saying that I wrote a novel about Donald Trump. I'm saying that I wrote a story, intuitively, unconsciously, almost reluctantly, that seems to mirror, in startling detail, what happens when a dangerous narcissist's past finally catches up with him. And maybe you've had this happen too. Maybe you've created something, art or writing, music, a conversation, that turned out to be more accurate than you ever meant it to be. Maybe you've had those moments when something came through you and you only understood it months or years later. That is the weirdness of this path, the gift and the cost of being a creative intuitive. Sometimes we see the world before it's ready to see itself. And sometimes we write things before we're ready to know them ourselves. So, what was this? A prophecy? A psychic echo? A deep pattern recognized by the subconscious? Maybe all three. But either way, I'm no longer brushing it off. Something in me knew. It knew enough to note it down in the December after the election and actually take some comfort from it. That justice will be served and will maybe avoid nuclear war in the process. If you're listening to this and feeling that same shiver of recognition, you probably know too. You might not always be able to prove it or explain it, but you feel it. So I want to leave you with this. Some men ruin your life, one might have ended his own. That's the tagline of The Most Beautiful Man in the World, and now it feels more true than ever. If this sparks something in you, if you've ever had one of those creative downloads or eerie recognitions, I'd love to hear from you. Come find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, or at girlpowerpublishing.com. And if you haven't read the book yet, maybe now's the time. The Most Beautiful Man in the World is available wherever you read, and you can listen to it on Audible, narrated by the brilliant Michelle Ford. Thanks for listening, and remember, what you create might be smarter, stranger, and more prophetic than even you know.